Knowledgeable, well-informed, conscientious, and sensitive, Bill has written about what really matters. Bill's book is a great read and well worth the price of admission. That's what Jerry Shirley said, the drummer for Humble Pie, about the new book out by veteran music journalist Bill Kopp, and I totally agree. I couldn't put it any better. It's one of those books you're going to want to geek out. If you love Pink Floyd, you've got to get this book. It's called Reinventing Pink Floyd, From Syd Barrett to the Dark Side of the Moon. And we're excited to have Bill join us on Big Blend Radio today. Go to the website, reinventingpinkfloyd.com. Go get it on Amazon. Go get it everywhere you can. Go get it and do it now. Welcome,
well, okay.
Welcome, Bill. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Hey, we're excited about this, because number one, it's one of our favorite bands. I mean,
for sure.
Just about every musician I know and every, music fan I know, when you say, okay, the top 10 list, Pink Floyd is like normally 1, 2, or 3. It seems like they are it,
Absolutely. And as it happens, Dark Side of the Moon, which is widely considered their masterpiece, was released 45 years ago yesterday.
Wow. We're late.
Oh.
And it's a full moon. It's a full moon. What happened? That's awesome, though. That good timing on your side. And I want to give a shout-out to your publishers, too, because I love publishers that will publish this kind of information that we can geek out on. Rowan and Littlefield Publishing who put it out. What's interesting to me, before we went on air, I was talking about as a kid getting into Pink Floyd and working backwards, and I've been listening to pretty much everything they've ever done. I didn't know the story at all until getting into your book, and you have pretty much, you've covered it all.
Well, I cover it all, but for the most part, what I really do with the book is I focus on the 5-year period between when the founder of the band, Syd Barrett, when he left the band in January of '68, to the 5 years later when Dark Side of the Moon came out. So I touch on obviously what happened before because you have to provide some context, and I bring the story up to date with what they did after Dark Side of the Moon. But the main focus is on those 5 years and the creative journey that they embarked upon to get from where they started to releasing that landmark album.
Syd Barrett is incredible, though. Like, he's a trip, and his story and Pink Floyd's story at that time reminds me of Peter Green and Fleetwood Mac, and how, it's like everyone's thought, he went off on LSD. Well, he did, and then he had the whole Fleetwood Mac story is crazy. All the different guitarists and everything that came in and out, and some went off in cults and all these different stories. But I feel like there's a similarity between Syd Barrett and Peter Green.
There is, of course. Peter Green eventually came back, and he plays and records today, and Syd Barrett didn't. After he left the band, he did do 2 solo albums, both of which with which he was helped to a great extent by his former bandmates. Then he pretty much retired in his 20s to a quiet life back in his hometown of Cambridge, where he took back up painting and, by most accounts, rarely, if ever, picked up a guitar ever again. And then he passed away quite a number of years ago now.
Yeah. Isn't that wild how many musicians are into painting?
Wow.
Like Grace Slick does it. There's just
calming.
So many musicians. Joni Mitchell paints too. There's so many of them who paint. I think they see in colors. They listen in colors.
Synesthesia, that's right. I think it may also be they're just 2 sides of the same coin. It's just another way of expressing one's creativity.
Mm-hmm. And now Syd Barrett, the band loved him, but he drove them nuts, basically. Because I was,
Nice.
Well, no, imagine you go out to perform and all of a sudden Syd Barrett decides not to play, and he just turns his back on the audience and that's it, So I think it became difficult, but they really loved him.
Yeah, they'd all been friends for a long time, and it's worth pointing out that these guys, they were in their very, very, very early 20s when all this was happening. So it was, mental health issues were certainly not understood anything like they are today, And lots of people were dropping. Well, not lots of people, but lots of people involved with the music scene were dropping acid and things like that. So it was, in some ways, it was hard to tell where the mental illness stopped and where the overuse of some recreational substances began.
I know. I have some friends like that.
Yeah,
just put it that way. I think,
there is a fair amount of paranoia that seems to come through.
that I think it's when your mind does expand and there's like, where is the limit? That's what music is all about, is to take you out of anything that's limiting. And Pink Floyd did that, man. Pink Floyd, I think they adopted all the senses. And when you looked at, I remember The Wall, watching that. It was the first thing, I think, ever of anything of Pink Floyd, was watching that, and I was, freaked out about it. But then when you look at what they do live and how they appealed to, with the visuals, and then also getting into doing a lot of soundtracks, too. I mean, they really were into the visual and the sensual and the audio-visual side of things.
Very much, and they did what they could to make the most of technology. Going back as far as the late 60s, they were using a quadraphonic system live in concert, and they would have tapes. There were a couple songs that they did that were sort of long, free-form numbers. One of them was called The Embryo, where in the middle section there were recordings of babies cooing and giggling, and footsteps, people running up and down stairs and through hallways. Through use of a joystick device, they could control those sounds. And so if you were in the concert hall, those sounds could be spinning around you in 360 degrees, which would be pretty freaky. And they were doing that, way, way ahead of their time with that sort of, surround sound, although it wasn't called that.
And that's how
That is a little freaky.
Well,
a little bit of libation there,
or anything. It's because we call it the whale music. They have the whale sounds. They do.
Mm-hmm.
It always sounds like underwater.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Yep.
So before we went on the air here, I was telling you that see Emily play has been just going nonstop in my brain, and I want everybody to have that experience. But it's really one of those classic songs, because when you think about Dark Side of the Moon and forward from that, when you look in the past, their music had that psychedelic side, but they were very R&B in the beginning.
Oh, certainly. Syd Barrett was very much influenced by blues and rhythm blues. And on that first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is very quintessentially 1967, it's as emblematic of the kind of music that was coming out in 67 as Sgt. Pepper or even the Moody Blues, Days of Future Past, both of which came out that same year. And so they're very sort of pop oriented. They're hooky, accessible music, but it's also has a kind of a freaky edge. And then once Syd was gone, having been their primary songwriter, their guitarist, the face of the band, they all but had to start over. And so they did, and that's why the music that you would hear post that first album is remarkably different.
It is like Fleetwood Mac. Like all of a sudden, Peter Green's gone, and then in comes Lindsey Buckingham, and it's completely different. Like the whole sound, the old school blues kind of went out, and it's just fascinating to me, that whole how it's the evolution of rock, of how it all started to, merge into different sounds, but having that. Like, I don't know, Pink Floyd just had this whole thing. It's orchestral at the same time. I mean, and the backup singers, I have to bring up the backup singers. Okay, so when did they start with that? Because I have to say that, just shout out to Hillary Larson, one of our food, wine, and travel writers. Anytime we talk about, okay, if you want to do something in your next life, what would you want to be? And she's like, I want to be a backup singer for Pink Floyd. So I had to bring that up for her. When did all that come into play?
Well, Dark Side of the Moon was the first album where they brought in outside backing vocalists So when the album came out in March '73, as it happens, Pink Floyd had been performing the work, the start to finish work that we know as Dark Side of the Moon for over a year by that point. They started performing it live in January '72, and they had female vocalists not from the very beginning. They brought them in eventually, though, as the pieces developed.
So it's interesting when you get a lot of creative people together in a band, and everybody's got their own thing, they've got their own style, their own way of thinking, own way of being creative, and then you mix it all together and manage to come up with something that's really, really good. And I can understand why there would be, sometimes drama and hookups between band members and then split ups and back and forth and all that. It's actually amazing that the music gets made.
That's a good point. And you talk about that combination of different creative, the creativity that comes from different people. For me, that's what makes this particular period, the albums that they released up to and including Dark Side of the Moon, so remarkable, is that was a period in the band's history when they were really, really collaborative. A lot of people would look at the work that Pink Floyd did after Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, The Wall, and they would say that to a large extent those are the product of the creative mind of Roger Waters, the bassist and lyricist, and not to diminish the other members' contributions, but to a large extent that is true. However, from 1968 to '73, they were as close as possible a group of equals in which they all contributed greatly to the creative process. And for me, that's why the work is so special. And I think had they not gone through that, I can't think of a good word to describe it, they had not gone through that formative period of working together like that, I don't think that something like Dark Side of the Moon could have ever happened.
What do you think about, Sid's relationship with David Gilmour? Because isn't that part of building that foundation? Because didn't they played together? They were buddies. And David Gilmour, I still think he's one of the top in the world. He's incredible.
He is, yes, without a doubt. Yeah, they were childhood friends. They had played together before. David Gilmour had been in a band called Joker's Wild, and Sid sat in with that band on at least one occasion in the early days, and they were friends, and that's part of why it's important to remember David Gilmour was not brought into the band to replace Syd Barrett, essentially. He was brought in to support him, to be a second guitarist. So he joined in January of '68. They did, no one's sure exactly, but by most accounts, we think they did 4 or 5 gigs together before it became obvious that Sid it wasn't going to work. And so then Sid was out. And at that point, here's David Gilmour, kind of the primary lead singer and the guitarist, the only guitarist, and he had never written a song in his life prior to that point.
Wow. That's incredible. It's so neat. It's so neat. And they were experimental too. I mean,
cool.
I mean, this is going back and writing this and getting all these other interviews. I mean, you got up stuff that people have kind of didn't realize. It kind of was under the layer of dust there, but you got to talk to all these people, of all walks of life that are connected with their story with Pink Floyd. I mean, who would you want to sit in a mixing room with? Because I know you're a musician too. Is there someone from everyone that you talked with, if you said, okay, I was going to spend a day with Pink Floyd, recording and watching them at work and being part of that process, who would you want in the room?
Oh gosh, I'd want everyone involved. But if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose David Gilmour.
Yeah, he's experimental. He's super cool. Yeah. And I think he's got that's that side of brilliance and where you're so genius, and I think he's right up there. I would love to do that as well. Okay, so what got you into I'm going to do something on Pink Floyd and go back into those, that time frame, and what was that? Because this is the other part of it. It's really fascinating, their history, but you are showcasing like how they ran their business as a band, how to stay on top of things, how to keep something fresh and new.
Well, like so many people of my generation, I discovered the band pretty far into their career. For most people, the entry point for Pink Floyd was either Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall. So 1973 or 1979. For me, it was 73. I discovered that album and really just fell in love with it. It was a big influence on me as a musician as well. I had been taking classical piano lessons as a kid. When I started listening to that album, I decided I want to learn to play by ear. And so using that album and then Wish You Were Here, when that came out, that's how I taught myself to play without using, sheet music. What I discovered, though, as I got farther and farther into the band's music, is that there was this. I said to myself, this music couldn't have just created itself out of nothing. It had to come from somewhere, and I'm always interested in the backstory. And so as I began to dig in and discover that, gosh, they had done 7 albums before Dark Side of the Moon. I began to explore those, and just in subsequent years, just talking to so many different people who know and love Dark Side of the Moon, I'll say, well, that was their 8th album, and they'll kind of some of them will give me kind of a quizzical look and say, really? Gosh, I don't think I realized that. And so I thought it's really important to share that story, and so the book focuses more on their musical journey. I don't spend a lot of time getting into a lot of the interpersonal stuff or too much of the business stuff beyond where it's relevant to the music, because other people have written about that. I really wanted to focus on the music because, in the end, that's what an artist leaves behind.
But they went into everything, man. I mean, that's what I'm saying. They didn't just, they were big. Like when you look at a band like U2 and how they changed the experience for people, and I think that's when you've got it transcends business. I mean, this is something that it will always be a part of people, And you think about Wish You Were Here. Is it true, Wish You Were Here? Am I getting right that they actually wrote that for Sid?
Maybe in a sort of an oblique way. I mean, I think in the same way that Dark Side of the Moon is about big themes. It's about big ideas that everyone can relate to. So too is Wish You Were Here about a number of different things. There are definitely very, very clear references to Sid, and he was definitely, I think, in Roger Waters' mind when he was writing. But it's in no way about Sid, I wouldn't say.
So now, when you putting this whole thing together, because like I was saying, anybody into music and rock and Pink Floyd, you're going to geek out on this. I mean, it's like a candy store in a book. Everything's in there. How long did, taking notes on all of this and doing all these interviews, how much work went into this? Because to me, it feels like, someone could have been working their entire life on this.
It took me 3.5 months to write it.
Are you kidding me?
Wow.
I'm not kidding you. And
really?
Oh, my God.
Wow. Okay, well, I guess I should explain. I've been thinking about this idea for most of my life.
Yeah.
But once I sat down to write it, there was a fair amount of research, and my wife Audrey helped she did a lot of the legwork, a lot of the research for me, compiling things. I said, well, I need this, try to find that old interview or that old article. But yeah, it 3.5 months to write the first draft. I began in May and turned it in August.
Wow,
that's amazing.
Wow. So, but then again, you write something daily on your blog. So you've got that flow going on, and that's the truth. Also, your writing style is everything just flows. You get all these nuggets of information, but it's not like going to school, okay? Because there's no such thing as school. Even I know there's the rock, the School of Rock, but no, this is different. But if everyone goes to musoscribe.com, that's your blog. But you've been doing something on there every day.
For about 9 years now. That's right. Yeah.
Wow. What led you?
Interviews, essays, album reviews, all kinds of things.
So did you think you were going to do that when you were a kid? I mean, I always looked up to journalists, as a whole. Like I always thought, journalists, that's the thing. And then to be like the rock journalist, like, that's badass.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Like really, there's no better journalist. Now, like, so what was that little sparky for you to go like, I'm going to, write this and you play as well and perform?
Right, yeah, I've known ever since I was probably about 11 years old that this is what I wanted to do. Now, I took a big detour and didn't do it for a very, very, very long number of years. But yeah, it's kind of what I've always hoped that I would get to do. And so, I've been doing it now for quite a while, and I'll keep doing it as long as I can.
Well, cool. Are you going to write any more, like on Pink Floyd, or write any other books like this?
Definitely going to write some more books. I'm kicking around a couple ideas right now. Got at least 2, maybe 3 book ideas. Nothing to announce yet, but definitely there'll be more books.
Oh, good. I'm really glad to hear that. And when putting this together, I mean, you have this idea, and you're okay. I'm going to go in the history part, and you get everybody understanding the musicians, and understanding the music and this creativity that they have. This just amazing creativity. And was there something that shocked you? Because there's a lot of things in here that people don't, like you're saying, people didn't know. Like, we think we know all this stuff, but we find out reading your book we don't. Was there something that shocked you?
Well, there's a quote that I read, and just to back up for a second, since I've known since I was quite young that I wanted to be a music journalist, when I was a teenager, I read all the big rock journalists and reviewers. And, so I built up quite a library of all that kind of stuff, all the rock magazines from the 70s and things. And there was a quote that someone in Rolling Stone magazine said that, and I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but essentially, Pink Floyd is a band that never throws away a good idea. And, so I've always sort of known that. But as I really dug into their history, I discovered that was absolutely true. With the benefit of hindsight, almost anything that you could pick from their catalog in those first 7 albums can be seen in its own way as sort of a signpost along the journey toward Dark Side of the Moon. And so while I sort of, quote unquote, knew that, once I was doing all the research, I discovered just how absolutely true that is. So that was, for me, to the extent to which that was true, that was a big surprise.
That's a good life lesson.
It's interesting when you look at the band members. I always try to think back, okay, Beethoven, Brahms, Bach. I wonder how similar their characters were as people, because it's totally different kind of music, but not really. I mean, it's different, but I just, when you look at the rock and roll era and how free it is, and then you think of classical music, I just wonder what what would Mozart think listening to Dark Side of the Moon?
Well, we'll never know. They obviously came up in very, very different circumstances. The members, with the exception of Richard Wright, the keyboardist, who had a background in jazz, none of the musicians in Pink Floyd were what one would call technically very, very, very proficient. They were good musicians, but they were not incredibly technical musicians. So a lot of the art came out of sometimes what we create is a product of our limitations, and that's what makes it good. And I think for Pink Floyd, that was definitely the case. They're often lumped in with the quote-unquote progressive rock movement, but one of the hallmarks of a lot of progressive artists is that they're real musical hotshots. Pink Floyd really were not so much that they were not they were no punk band. They were not primitive in any sense, but they were not really high end in their ability to play really, really fast or complicated things. They just made the very most of what they could with what they had. So I think they're quite different from the classical composers in that way.
Yeah, they bend. There's a bendness. That sounds weird. There's a roundness to their music. It's true, and I think that comes from playing rock and roll. That the old school, like the blues, and you get to understand a roundness of a note and not making it chop chop chop. I have no clue if that makes sense, but Pink Floyd is
does.
like they're the kings of round music.
Yeah, because classical music can be very regimental.
I like that. And yeah, I like that description. And one thing that I like about it is that it's not a musicological term. You're speaking from the heart in terms of how the music moves you. And that was part of my goal with the book too, was not to get really deep into musicological analysis. I mean, I'll make a couple references here and there to chord progressions and root notes and things like that. But for the most part, my goal was, not to write for an audience of schooled musicians or to necessarily to write for an audience of hardcore Pink Floyd fanatics. I think the Pink Floyd fanatics will find plenty to enjoy in the book, but I think anyone who just likes their music, who likes the well-known stuff and is interested where it came from, I think that we'll find things that will help them appreciate that backstory and the music that they made in their less well-known years.
I always find that so fascinating and so important because, when people go like, how long did it take you to write this book? Okay, so you went, 3.5 months. But that's not true. It started since you're a kid. You know what I mean? The reality is you've been practicing for a long time. And, so it doesn't take 3.5 months. And so that's the same thing with musicians. I mean, you go from The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Now that's like one of the top albums in the world ever. And go to Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, that is one of the best psychedelic sandwiches you could ever have. And I want to have that understanding of who were these kids. And I always find that's such a cool time frame of, the British invasion time too, where, there was this excitement, like let's create new sounds. And now there's all the sampling of everything. I'm like, can't we have like new, like I know that they're, learning blues and rock and things like that, but it was fresh and new and different. And there were just, there's no limit. They're allowed to color outside the lines. And I think that's such an exciting time for musicians, when that beginning spark of it all. That's the
I would
time.
agree. And that was such a rich and fertile period for music overall, from the mid '60s to the mid '70s, whether you're talking about rock or jazz or any number of different styles of music, that was just a really, really creative period.
It was, and just to think, I looked up Sid Barrett, and I'd never watched the old stuff on YouTube and things, and I saw them play, and it was like at the very beginning. They were on some TV show. It was black and white. I watched this it was a while ago, and some guy was interviewing them, Roger Waters and Sid, and I always love to watch the old school thing. Nancy and I love to do it. We do it on Fridays after radio shows. It's wine time, and look up. It's the cool thing about YouTube. You can see all these things that you never got to see growing up. It's like I didn't know I'd be able to watch Pink Floyd in their very first, things, and I was like, dude, this is cool. And the guy was talking about how loud they were, and I'm going, Pink Floyd, it could be loud, but they were like, if any band had dynamics and will draw you in and out, like that was really interesting. The guy who was the interviewer was like, you're loud. Why do you have to be so loud? And they're like, well, you may think you are loud, but others don't think we're loud, and we're not going to stop.
Yes. Hans Keller, why must it be so loud? Yes, I know the clip. Yes, it's so funny, and they're quite nonplussed. He says that, and they look at him like, dude, you're just some old guy.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. They're so perplexed that they would be asked such a question because, as you say, to them it doesn't seem loud at all.
Yeah. And
that's funny.
I love their album titles too. They're so creative that way. I'm nostalgic for this now. The album A Saucer Full of Secrets. Who comes up with an album title like that?
Cool too.
that is like, dude, what's in your tea?
Yeah.
So when you
it's funny. A lot of times they would go through multiple titles for a song, especially some of the instrumental pieces. I can't remember all of them, but I know like the song Echoes, which is one of their well-known songs.
Mm-hmm.
That was originally called Return to the Son of Nothing. And then at one point they had a song called The Amazing Pudding. And so it's interesting because bootleg collectors over the years would find out, there's this song that we've never heard called The Amazing Pudding. And then they would discover, no, it's a song that we all know. It's just in the early days they were calling it something else. And so they did that a lot. They had playful. They had some fun with their titles of their albums and their songs for sure.
Well, the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, I didn't know I didn't know it was an album. Okay, so everybody can email and yell at me later. Okay, I'm not stupid, but I didn't know that. I can't help it. I know that it's one of the top albums in the world, but I didn't know, and I didn't know that I was listening to it all the time. I just didn't. I don't know. It's like this is what happens when you don't have a vinyl collection anymore, which is disgusting. I mean, I used to have like such a killer collection, and then we had to leave countries and things. Yeah, but it went. I mean, I had the original White Album and like old school T-Rex and like oh man, and I'm still bummed about it. And so then when you don't have those old school vinyl albums, I think we forget the whole. When everything's just an MP3, there's like something changes for you.
Yeah.
And you forget the liner art, the cover art. I don't know. It just kind of goes away. And now I'm mad about the Piper at the Gates of Dawn because that whole concept and the whole thing with the wind and the willows, which is some crazy stuff.
It's the idea of looking through the albums and covers. This is the one you want. You carefully take out the record. You carefully put it back when you're done because it's special. Now things just download and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
There's a whole experience.
A lot of times I just listen and I don't look at what I'm listening to, and that's what happened with that album. I had no idea, and so thank you.
Yeah, our relationship with music has changed a great deal over the years. I think there's certainly, I mean, there are some advantages, portability being the main one of MP3s and streaming and that sort of thing. But there is definitely something lost in not having the tactile experience of looking at the album cover and reading the liner notes. And talking about Dark Side of the Moon, not only did that have that amazing, really iconic cover, but it was a gatefold. It opened up, and so there was things to see inside. And that record came with 2 full-size posters and 2 stickers. So you got goodies when you got the album.
And there's something, man, the sticker thing was a big deal. That's something we did as little kids. And then when you became big kids, like that never goes away. And guitar cover, cases, you'd have the old school stereo and it would be covered with stickers. I love that. I did have Dark Side of the Moon in South Africa when I was a kid. I had that album. Now that I think of it, I had a lot of that stuff. Damn, I know I'm saying this just because I know that you have a bunch of vinyl, don't you?
Yeah.
I've got a few thousand, I think. Yeah.
Oh. They even smell good. They smell good.
Yeah.
You got to sniff your vinyl. I know that's a normal thing before you play it. Okay, so one of the songs on that album. One of the songs of the Piper at the Gates of Dawn that I realized I listened to a lot, and I didn't even know the name until going through everything, is Astronomy Domine or Domine. I don't know how to pronounce it. Like,
Domine.
what is that? I love that.
Astronomy Domine.
Domine. Okay.
Yeah.
See, thank you for being approachable and for writing in an approachable style for people like me.
Well,
then I don't feel
thank
scared to say, I don't know how to say this. I don't care. I don't want to say it. I want to learn. But can you give us a little history of that song? Because to me, that is like Dark Side of the Moon kind of style to me in a lot of ways.
Well, sometimes people describe Pink Floyd as space rock, and that's not a term that they really embraced, although, they had a number of tracks over the years that certainly, did play into that. And, of course, the title of The Dark Side of the Moon plays into that. But Astronomy Domine is a Syd Barrett tune from the very early days. And it has a lot of it's kind of an interesting cross between Sid's sort of pop approach, which he used on songs like See Emily Play, for example, and Arnold Lane and things like that, and then his more free-form experimental side, which would be represented by a song like Interstellar Overdrive. Astronomy Domine is kind of the sweet spot in between. And that song remained in the band's set for a very long time. As I said, Sid was gone by January '68. When I saw Pink Floyd in 1994, they opened with Astronomy Domine, and Pink Floyd was never an oldies band, but they still put that song in the set because it's aged really well.
It's trippy. It just, you're listening to something completely different, and now for something completely different, Pink Floyd. Okay, so some history on the name of the band, the Pink Floyd. How did they come up with that?
Well, that again comes from the mind of Syd Barrett. Sid was a big blues and R&B fan, and so he combined the names of two Piedmont folk blues African-American artists, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council, one of whom was originally from Spartanburg, South Carolina, which is just down the road from where I live in North Carolina.
We've been there.
Yeah?
Yeah, we were there. Seriously, I remember the statues. There was like these statues in this little charming downtown, like very small. I remember we went to see a musician or something.
Didn't we go to see Jimmy Driscoll?
Yeah, we went to Asheville, North Carolina, the same trip. This was 25 years ago. This was a while ago when we just got back to this country from South Africa, and we lived in Florida, and we went on a road trip. And I remember we were supposed to go see somebody in a band in Spartanburg, where you're talking about. And I remember photographing statues, and that it was a very religious-looking town, if that makes any sense. Could I say that? Add like a. It
what
seems,
does that mean?
I don't know if we're in the same town, but I remember that town, and I think something happened. We broke down, or something happened out there. But it's pretty out there. It's beautiful. That whole region you live in a good place. It's beautiful. That whole area.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I love it here.
Yeah. I remember hiking at a place called Pearson Falls. I don't know where we were, if it was North Carolina or South Carolina, but
that was beautiful.
It was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, and I don't know where. I'm going to have to Google it now. Thanks for that. Well, I'm really glad you're going to continue writing. I do want to ask you this: for anybody getting into the world of being a music journalist or a rock journalist, what advice would you give them?
Oh my. Save a bunch of money first.
Yeah.
It's like so many other things. It's very much like being a musician in that it's something that someone does because they have a passion for it, not because they want to become wealthy.
And that's the best stuff in life. Yeah.
But the best thing if you wanted to be a music journalist, the best thing would be listen to as much music as you can and read as much as you possibly can. Those are good. That's good advice for everybody, though.
Yeah,
of course.
No matter what, that's it. And then, but how it's like with us doing with our magazines and things like that. It's like, here, will you write an album review? And I'm like, no. I used to, and I would sweat over it. Like, that would feel like it would take me 3.5 months to write a review on an album because I always battled, like, being personable. And then it helps because we're both musicians, so we can talk music and understand notes and things like that. But there's this, how do you balance it where you're not, and that's the thing about your book is balance, where there's a personal style, you connect as a reader to you personally, but it's not it's you can come up with your own side. You understand, you don't say, okay, like, if Bill likes this song, that I'm going to like it. You know what I mean? You allow that balance, and I think that's the thing about reviews and doing this kind of thing is that balance of understanding good music and what's bad music. Is there such a thing? But how do you balance it out where it's not totally personal, if that even made sense?
Sure, it does. I think part of the job of a music critic or any sort of a critic isn't to do the reader's thinking for them. I mean, that's an insult to the reader.
Right.
It's to be something of a consumer guide. There are plenty of reviews where what I'll do is I'll set out what the particular virtues of a recording are, because everything has some sort of value, or everything I've heard so far has at least some sort of value. And so what I try to do is focus in on that, because that thing which makes a given record worth hearing may not be something that particularly appeals to me, but somebody else may go, oh, that's exactly the sort of thing that I like. Mm-hmm. So what I try to do is act as a consumer guide, and just give the reader an idea. Well, here's what this is about, and here's where they're coming from, and this is what it sounds like and why you might like it. For the most part, the only time I'll write a negative review is if it's a well-known artist who has just really let us down, who's just really disappointed us and done something substandard. I'll never write a negative review about someone who's not well known. No one needs to be kicked when they're trying to get their career going.
And it is, no matter what, there's opinions and opinions. Sometimes when you watch like the Food Channel, and you have these judges and they really trash some of the food, and you're like, well, it looks pretty good actually.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think there's that balance of, you're being informative, but not getting in the way of it. And the negative thing, I think we have enough on social media now to cover that. Yeah. Everybody's opinion on Yelp.
Yeah, you make a good point about the food critics. I've lost count of how many times I've seen TV food critics say, never put cheese on shellfish.
Yeah.
And depending on the recipe, I think it works great.
So
I do a lot of cooking, so yeah.
There you go. Well, music and cooking go hand in hand.
Music,
painting, and cooking, and wine.
Creativity is really about pushing boundaries and breaking rules.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's good to know the rules.
Man,
absolutely.
Know
what the rules are so that you can break them intelligently. Yes.
Yeah.
Well done, Pink Floyd. They did that.
Break them with style and with a purpose, not just okay. But that's how you find out something tastes better or looks better or listens better, by just pushing that little envelope there.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, we've covered a lot, Bill.
Yeah.
Anything else? No, just kidding. It's been a true pleasure having you on the show, and super excited that your book is out. Everyone go get it again. Go to reinventingpinkfloyd.com, or you can get it on Amazon again by Bill Kopp, and the full title is Reinventing Pink Floyd, From Syd Barrett to the Dark Side of the Moon. And hey, celebrate the Dark Side of the Moon, 45 years. That makes me feel very young. Thank you, Bill, for reminding us of that.
Thanks so much for having me on today. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, keep us posted on your next books, okay?
Yeah.
I will do that, yes.
All right. Awesome. Everyone, again, musoscribe.com. Keep up with Bill over there as well, but reinventingpinkfloyd.com.
I'm going to place a bet on what the books are going to be about.
I know. We're waiting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. You have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.